The quality of your life is in large part determined by what you consistently pay attention to. Attention is not just a casual habit, it is a neural function. At any given moment, your brain is bombarded with sensory input. Sounds, sights, emotions, physical sensations, notifications, conversations, and internal thoughts. But the brain does not treat all of this input equally. It filters, selects, and amplifies based on where you choose to place your attention. That decision to focus on yourself or on distractions literally reshapes your neural pathways. From a neuroscience standpoint, attention is regulated primarily through the prefrontal cortex, particularly the dorsolateral and ventromedial regions. These regions are responsible for executive functions like planning, impulse control, and long-term decision making. When you focus deeply on your own growth, these circuits become more efficient. The brain essentially says, "This is important. Let's wire for more of this." The result is a self-reinforcing loop of cognitive efficiency and behavioral alignment. Now contrast that with the typical day of someone who never guards their focus. They wake up and scroll social media. Their attention is split between half-finished tasks and conversations that hold no depth. They consume random information, react to minor opinions, and respond emotionally to noise that has nothing to do with their mission. Over time, their attention system becomes fragmented. Their brain is constantly in a reactive state. The neural circuits that support deep work and self-discipline begin to atrophy from lack of use. They are no longer designing their life, they are simply reacting to it. What most people don't realize is that attention is a limited, energy-consuming process. The more often you divide your focus, the more cognitive fatigue you accumulate. This leads to decision fatigue, poor self-control, anxiety, and eventually burnout. But when you focus on yourself, on your goals, your values, your habits, you enter what researchers refer to as a flow-conducive state. Your cognitive resources align toward a singular purpose, and your neurobiology rewards you for it. What you focus on also determines what becomes salient to the brain. Salience is the brain's way of tagging something as important. If you constantly focus on comparison, gossip, or approval, your brain becomes wired to seek those inputs again and again. But if you focus on self-discipline, physical health, learning, and emotional regulation, those behaviors become easier to access. Your identity then is not fixed, it is shaped through repetitive attention. This is also why silence is not just peaceful, it is powerful. In silence, you strip away the noise that competes for your neural bandwidth. Without the flood of sensory distractions, your brain naturally reorients toward your inner goals. It begins to strengthen the pathways that reflect your core direction. The absence of stimulation gives the brain room to deepen the very circuits that produce clarity, creativity, and emotional resilience. There's a phenomenon called neuroplasticity, which is the brain's ability to change its wiring based on experience. Every moment you consciously direct your focus inward to your routines, your standards, your growth, you are triggering this process. Neurons that fire together wire together. So when you repeatedly focus on progress, the brain forms stronger synaptic connections around behaviors that lead to achievement. These changes aren't philosophical, they are measurable physiological transformations in the brain. In practice, this means that choosing silence and solitude isn't passive, it's an active strategy to optimize brain function. It's in those quiet moments of self-focus that your memory consolidates, your stress hormones stabilize, and your dopamine system calibrates for longer-term rewards. The individual who understands this doesn't chase attention, they channel it inward. And as a result, their life begins to organize itself around what truly matters, not what merely distracts. Dopamine is one of the most misunderstood chemicals in the human brain. Most people assume it's about pleasure, but in truth, dopamine is about motivation, drive, and the anticipation of reward. It's the neurochemical that keeps you pursuing a goal, striving toward the next level, and showing up day after day with energy and direction. But the source of that dopamine matters more than most people realize. The difference between external dopamine and internally generated dopamine can determine whether your brain is wired for distraction or long-term progress. When you seek validation from others, likes on a post, attention in a conversation, or constant acknowledgement from peers, you're activating the brain's reward system in short, sharp bursts. This system involves the mesolimbic pathway, particularly the nucleus accumbens, which lights up when something novel, exciting, or socially validating occurs. But this kind of dopamine hit is fleeting. It feels good for a moment, then quickly fades, and the brain craves more. Over time, it becomes a compulsive loop of checking, comparing, and performing. And each time you feed that loop, your baseline levels of dopamine drop. You need more stimulation to feel the same drive. Eventually, nothing feels meaningful unless it's seen, liked, or praised by others. That's the trap of externally sourced dopamine. It builds dependency on the reactions of other people. It pulls your attention away from your inner goals and places your value in the hands of others. In contrast, internally generated dopamine, the kind that comes from silent effort, from pushing through resistance, from doing the right thing when no one is watching, is far more sustainable and far more powerful for building long-term success. When you quietly wake up early to train your body or develop your mind, when you stick to your plan even though no one will clap for it, your brain registers that action as aligned with your purpose. This activates a different set of circuits, the mesocortical pathway, which connects the ventral tegmental area to the prefrontal cortex. These are the pathways associated with long-term thinking, delayed gratification, and personal growth. Every time you take a disciplined action in silence, you're reinforcing these circuits. You're training your brain to value process over praise. That is the true essence of self-driven progress. The science behind it is clear. Dopamine that is internally generated through effort builds resilience. When you reward yourself mentally for staying consistent, for finishing a workout, for sticking to a difficult task, your brain learns to associate effort with satisfaction. This is what behavioral scientists call reward prediction error, when the brain starts expecting a reward not from outcome, but from action itself. That means your effort becomes the reward. And when effort becomes the reward, you can outlast anyone who's only motivated by applause. Silence plays a critical role in this process. When you remove yourself from noise, from constant updates, from notifications, from reactive conversations, you give your dopamine system a chance to reset. Most people are overstimulated. Their dopamine system is constantly chasing novelty, which actually lowers baseline motivation over time. But when you practice stillness and focused solitude, your brain begins to normalize again. It becomes more sensitive to subtle rewards, like the satisfaction of finishing a chapter, completing a set, or holding a commitment. This is why the most driven individuals often operate quietly. They understand that silence shields their momentum. It gives them space to build without interference. It allows their brain to shift from chasing external outcomes to generating internal momentum. And that shift is the foundation for deep, lasting transformation. It is also the reason why sustainable success often appears invisible at first. It's built in the hours no one sees, fueled by dopamine no one gives you, generated by discipline no one applauds, cultivated in silence no one interrupts, and strengthened by focus no one can take away from you because it comes from within. The environment you place yourself in is not neutral. It is either constructing the architecture of your brain to support your highest potential, or it's subtly eroding your focus, energy, and discipline. Most people underestimate how profoundly their surroundings influence the way their nervous system functions. But from a neuroscientific perspective, your environment is one of the most powerful sculptors of your attention, behavior, and identity. Every external cue you're exposed to, every face, every voice, every sound, every notification sends a signal to your brain. These signals either align with your goals or they compete against them. Over time, they condition your internal state. The brain operates based on patterns. What you repeatedly expose it to becomes what it expects. So if your environment is filled with noise, comparison, distraction, and emotional volatility, your brain begins to adapt to that. The amygdala becomes hyper-responsive. The prefrontal cortex, responsible for logic, decision-making, and willpower, begins to burn out under constant demands for attention shifting. There is a principle in neuroscience called experience, degreement, degrowth, and plasticity. This means that the brain changes in response to the inputs it receives most consistently. If your daily inputs are chaotic, disorganized, or superficial, your brain becomes optimized for chaos, distraction, and surface level thinking. But if your environment promotes silence, focus, minimalism, and depth, your brain begins to reinforce neural pathways that support those behaviors. You literally begin to wire your mind for clarity and endurance simply by choosing where you spend your time and who you allow into your cognitive space. Even subtle environmental factors.